Well, hello again, everyone, and welcome to the next in our series of webcasts that we're bringing you from Travel Weekly as part of our roadmap to recovery from this COVID-19 pandemic. I'm joined this morning very early by three executives of the travel industry. We've got Paul Charles, who is the Chief Executive of the PC Agency, but also the coordinator of the Posh Quarantine campaign. We've got Gary Lewis, who is the Chief Executive of the Travel Network Group. And we've got Richard Singer, who is the Chief Executive of icelolly.com. So welcome all of you. It's been another pretty busy weekend. I think things were starting to calm down a bit, but then on Saturday evening, we got the announcement from the government that Spain would now come off the safe list, and it would be a country that Brits would have to quarantine if they were coming back from Spain. So this has kind of thrown the industry into a bit of turmoil. Paul, perhaps we could start with you, because you and I spoke, didn't we, the day before, and we were thinking it may be announced on Friday, and then it wasn't, along with the other sort of tweaks to the list. So why did it come in? Why do you think it wasn't announced on Friday and then suddenly came on Saturday? Because it really did cause a headache.
Well, this is part of the roller coaster ride of this story, and imagine what consumers are going through, let alone us in the industry. Yes, on Friday, of course, the government wanted to manage out the news that it was adding a number of countries to its favoured green corridor list, including Latvia and Slovenia. And then, of course, there was no other news about Portugal, which is the big country that appears to have been missed off so many lists the government's producing at the moment. And then on Saturday, we had this tweet which emerged from a journalist from the Sunday Times, very respected political editor, who tweeted that he understood it was going to come in at midnight, the quarantine for anyone returning to the UK from Spain. So yet again, you've had government announcements by social media rather than any formal process. They formally confirmed it about 2 hours later at around 8 o'clock on Saturday evening through a press release. But this is no way to communicate to hundreds of thousands of people affected by this decision, or to the trade who had no advance warning this was coming on Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it coincided with Foreign Office advice as well against all but essential travel to mainland Spain, which caused, even greater problem. Gary, let's come to you, because of course your members are right in the firing line here. I mean, Paul just mentioned how disruptive this is, confusion for the trade. What was the immediate impact on people sort of Saturday night? Was it, I saw lots on social media about agents sort of just suddenly having to rush to their desks, on phones, trying to find flights home for people. Is that kind of how it played out for your members?
Yeah, absolutely. We can't underestimate the huge impact this has on customers, on our members, on the momentum that was slowly building over the last 4 weeks around customers having confidence to start considering going on holiday. We all have talked about what happens if there is a second spike in another country. The government has set up a structure to be able to include and not include in this process. But for Spain to hit now is devastating. For Spain to hit where there are specific areas that are not having infection rates increase in different parts of Spain, to do that blanket quarantine ban, for it to come in such a fashion, as Paul said, I think that had a double impact on our ability to understand and deal with the logic of why the government's made that decision. Clearly, the infection rate is increasing, I believe, to the same levels as Portugal and Iceland. So there's clearly an issue going on if you look at across, but Spain's are going up and Portugal and Iceland's infection rates are going down. But again, it's this blanket ban, it's this lack of communication, I think, which has caused such upheaval and fear. And we've all been thinking about what happens. We've all been dealing with, the biggest issue has not gone away, which is cancellation and refunds and consumers and those challenges. That hasn't gone away. But the fact that Spain has happened, it's our biggest destination, and then it's happened in such an abrupt fashion without seemingly consultation or conversation. I think that's why it's been received with such noise and fear.
Yeah. And Richard, to come to you, I mean, there's been quite a lot of talk, I guess, on social media, people saying they always said it could come in and out. As to Gary's point, the government did say at any point they could change things, and there's been sort of some criticism then that people, have gone away when they knew this could be the case. But I mean, a lot of these holidays will have been booked a year ago. It's not everybody's just suddenly thought, right, it's all clear, I'm going to book a last minute holiday. A lot of these, we're talking about 1.8 million people that will be either overseas or going away between now and the end of August. So that's not all last minute bookings, presumably.
No, I mean, as you say, people would have booked last year. If the government gives a green light for people to travel, then, they don't get their money back. So at the end of the day, those people who have booked in good faith would have gone. I mean, I think this time last week, we would have probably expected today people to be traveling to Spain without quarantine, and also probably Portugal to be back on the list. And we sit here today, of all the destinations, it had to be Spain, where it was, same as Gary, consistently the highest booked, highest searched, destination to go to. But I think, yes, the government has said that they could do this, but equally, as Paul and Gary have just described, I think it's the fashion through which they've done it creates this, huge amount of confidence which just disappears from people. Can you imagine being a holidaymaker who arrived on Saturday to be told that evening that it's now quarantine from now on without any notice period whatsoever? I mean, to do it on a Saturday, typically changeover days as well, you've had another drove of many, thousands of British holidaymakers or even, residents going to see their families or whatever in Spain for that to happen. But I think this whole period, we just felt as a travel industry has been very difficult. You can see pretty clearly that this is to do, it's so news driven as to what drives people's kind of methods and way of behaving. And obviously went through this whole plateau period where there was nothing. Many felt there wasn't going to be a summer trading period. Then these air bridges were announced and you could see activity starting to happen then. Then these air bridges never really happened. They were just exemption lists from our own quarantine with a whole raft of entry restrictions. And, then it was delayed, which meant that the momentum that we had kind of fell away. But probably over the last 3 weeks, as normal domestic life has resumed, people have got their haircuts, people have gone and met, their families, people's attention turned to holidays. And we felt actually this were in a pretty good place, all things considered. And then to have that thrown at you on a Saturday, evening, and same as Paul, I saw it via a tweet from that journalist. And, by the end of the evening, there's a full quarantine. So it's just the manner of which it happens. You'll have people thinking now, crikey, could you imagine if I was that Spanish holiday maker? I think it's just not worth the hassle, not worth taking a chance.
I mean, you make the point about timing. I've seen people saying, look, they gave us 2 weeks notice to get to know that we've got to wear masks in a shop, but they give us, less than 24 hours to coordinate something that's a much bigger, exercise, isn't it? To try and get people home or to cancel their bookings or to change them.
It's the wrong way around, isn't it? If it's masks should come in immediately, but when you're having to, effectively repatriate thousands of people or have that sort of things, then, holiday companies, tour operators need time to be able to organise that in a reasonable fashion. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I think the government is not learning any lessons from the last few weeks. It's still not consulting effectively with the trade before it makes decisions. At least give a few hours notice to the industry, especially airlines, to be able to prepare their communications to consumers. Airlines got no warning on Saturday evening of this coming from 6 o'clock onwards when the tweet first appeared. It's impossible when there's so many, 1.8 million people who potentially were booked to the end of August. When you're in that situation, the government should be outlining very clearly what the planning should be. But it came out of the blue. Understandable maybe why, from a medical point of view, they moved very quickly, and it's good to see the government moving quickly on something. But there needs to be the lessons learned should be around better communication, consulting earlier with those who are at the core of decision making in the travel industry. And crucially, also explaining why they're making these decisions. There is still no clear reason why the government has chosen this blanket quarantine across Spain and the islands, bearing in mind the islands have lower R rates. And why Portugal is not included, we still don't know that. And the Portuguese are very clear that they don't believe they've got so many cases. There's still too much mystery behind these decisions. And the government is not learning, and it should be, because then it would carry more people with it.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing around, I mean, you mentioned there the R rate is lower in the islands than it is in mainland Spain. I think it's lower in the islands than it is in the UK, which is another irony, of course. There's a report this morning on the BBC saying that the Balearic and the Canary Islands governments are now in talks about trying to get excluded from this. I don't know if you're close to that at all, Paul, or do you think that's likely? Have they got a case there or are we really stuck with the islands also being included, because obviously very popular destination for tourists?
They certainly have a case, but I don't think the government will change its mind. One thing we do know from this government is once they make a decision, they want to save face and not do a U-turn before 2 or 3 weeks. We got a U-turn on quarantine blanket, a few weeks ago, but I don't believe they're going to change immediately. They have seen data clearly, and I'm told from my sources in government, they have seen data that shows the whole of Spain is ratcheting up in terms of cases. They believe the islands are also part of that, and they can't control the numbers who are going between islands and the mainland, especially Spanish citizens.
Right.
And that's what is provoking the fear in the government, that there is just this lack of control about a certain country. So it's understandable why they might take this measure. The problem is they should be communicating what information they're using to make these decisions. But I sadly don't think the islands, the Balearics especially, are going to see a U-turn by this government. It doesn't do that.
Okay, all right. Gary, I wanted to come to you about the complexities of how different operators are handling this latest announcement. I mean, we've got TUI that have cancelled all its flights until August, or its holidays, sorry, until August 9th, I think. And then you've got Jet2 that are continuing, even to mainland Spain, where obviously the Foreign Office advises against it. So presumably then any insurance policy wouldn't apply. So they're I mean, and then obviously there'd be loads of other companies that operate to Spain as well. I mean, how are you helping your members sort of chart a course through that? Because obviously everybody's doing something different.
Yeah, so what you said there is really interesting, because Jet2 Holidays have, whilst they're still offering customers a refund and the ability to take a refund credit note or delay, they are still carrying through with holidays. So consumers that wish to still carry on, even against FCA advice, can carry on. I think it's the first time any main operator has done that against FCA advice, which in itself is really interesting, because it's effectively saying, look, come on, we believe this is safe. This is a consumer decision. And the issue then becomes travel insurance. Now, we know there are travel insurances that do cover consumers where the FCA advice is advising against travel. So that really does put the power and the decision making in the hands of the customers to be able to make it. Of course, those customers would still have to quarantine when they come back from travel. But I think it's a really interesting policy and a process from Jet2 Holidays. The impact of that for the consumer, actually it still is a customer choice and still helps the travel agent, because the customer still has a choice whether they wish to go or not, and they get their money back. So the money still TUI have made a very clear blanket decision, potentially because they operate differently with their airline, without the same airline resources that Jet2 Holidays get access to. So that in itself is different. What we did at the Travel Network Group, clearly on Saturday night, had a meeting as a central team to go, well, what is the impact? Sunday, we put comms out to our members to say we are still thinking the impact through, because we just didn't expect such a huge impact on such a large destination. And then we put out subsequent communication to all of our business partners asking for updates on their policy. So all 170 of our business partners are being asked, look, you've got to think this through and come back to us. So even though we knew the quarantine rules could still change, it's still taking us all a little bit by surprise as we're dealing with the other noise of refunds and credits. It is a challenge. And what just as a separate point that Paul was saying earlier about we don't know what government is thinking, I think we have explained a little bit what government are thinking. And they can't be held responsible for a journalist doing a tweet, but they absolutely should be held responsible for how they consult with us as an industry. And once again, it feels as us as an industry are finding out after journalists, are finding out through tweets when they should be asking for our understanding and impact, just so they can make a better and more informed decision. And also because they can give us more information and understanding, so we have a better informed decision about how we respond to it. Because genuinely, if we see all the facts and data and understanding of the government, we might come to the same conclusions that actually we need to make these decisions. But when we are not consulted, and it will come out to see who has been consulted by the industry, but once again, we as an industry are not being consulted. It feels we're not being consulted. We're dealing with millions of customers that we take responsibility for their health and safety, and we are left hearing it about from a tweet. And I think that's what's caused the fury and the anger once again in this incident.
And I think there are two things there actually which are really important. One is that the government is quite an immature government. Whether they're successful or not is another issue. But this is a government that only effectively came in December. And as a result, they don't fully understand the travel industry and how it works. They don't understand the minutiae of refunds, of how airlines work with tour operators, how money is paid so far in advance across the travel sphere. And that's one thing, that they really do still need to learn how the industry works, and that might help their policy decision making. But secondly, don't forget, this is complex because there are so many government departments involved.
Yeah.
You've got the Foreign Office, you've got the Department for Transport, you've got the Home Office involved in enforcement, you've got Downing Street, and you've also got the Treasury. So when you put all these government departments together, it's no wonder there's so much miscommunication or misaligned communication. And that is one of the fundamental problems with the way the travel industry is being treated at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Richard, to come to you, you mentioned earlier about how demand was starting to build, and yet we've got massive headlines all over the nationals today saying reports of cancellations, not just of Spain now, but France, Italy, other short-haul destinations, because of course this will put fear into people. I mean, other headlines, the pain in Spain, holiday hell, summer of uncertainty. I mean, this kind of story, I mean, they're going to write these stories. I understand that, but what impact do you see that happening, you know, having not just obviously on Spain, but the rest of the short haul market and the prospects for the summer that we were hoping we'd get something out of?
Yeah, I mean, it's all of those things. So yesterday, I mean, you know, we are completely in tune with what goes on in terms of travel news because we work in the travel industry. You know, many people on Saturday night wouldn't have been watching BBC News or getting, you know, worried about tweets from a political journalist. And, you know, my concern really was exactly that, was on was the impact to other destinations. So, you know, if I'm due to travel to Greece and I read a headline from yesterday's interview with Dominic Raab that, you know, the government can put a handbrake on at any time, then regardless of which destination, you're going to think, I'm not sure this is a particularly good idea because I don't want that to happen to me. Or equally, you know, my employer won't pay for me, you know, if I have to quarantine. I mean, I think the whole quarantine is an unenforceable thing anyway, and people will make their decisions as to what they want to do. But Sunday is always our biggest day in terms of traffic. We have a lot of activity going out. We have a lot of advertising happening. And you know, you look at Google Analytics on a kind of hour by hour basis, and you could see in the morning it was really pretty good. There was no impact, but as the news stories started trickling through, and you know, people would see each other in the street to say, "Have you heard what's happened about Spain?" You could really see, you know, the activity, you know, tail off. It was still a good day, but I think we're not really going to feel the kind of hangover of that decision until this week. So I mean, the question is this week, but you know, Gary and his, you know, we don't sell holidays, but you know, Gary and his consortium members do. But you know, I think the interesting discussion will be when somebody phones up and says, "I'm due to go to Greece. I don't want to go now because I'm concerned." How do we handle things like that? And that's absolutely inevitable.
Yeah, because if it's still open, then theoretically they can still go, and they're going to have trouble getting their money back. A really interesting point you just made there, Richard, about the quarantine not being enforced. I mean, they had various holidaymakers on news this morning who were saying, well, I've rushed home because I was worried because I've got a job and all the rest of it to worry about. There's absolutely nothing, nothing. This one was talking particularly about Stansted Airport, just literally sailed through, said he saw loads of people not even bothering to fill out the forms, just walked straight through. So, I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? You're going to, you know, it doesn't seem to be being enforced in any way. And so then you've got some people who go, well, shall I just risk it? Because they're not going to find, if they're not going to find me, how would they know?
Well,
I think that goes back to Paul's point about the complexities of everything going on, though, doesn't it? That there's so much going on, and we can hold the government to account on everything, but the reality is the airports have a responsibility, customs have a responsibility, we all have a responsibility, and the majority of people will follow those rules and will enforce. I believe there is supposed to be a track and trace that if we take your details, we phone 1 in 5 people through the track and trace process. But again, it comes down to people's responsibility and where we are. But the impact on our members is enormous. They do not earn income until people depart on holiday. The momentum build up for next year, for 2021, is hugely important for those bookings. The government have done some really good things: the furlough scheme, the CBEL loans, and the economic impact, and that has meant that the majority of our members are very robust, and they're expecting a very poor 2020. We've seen that, but also very poor bookings for 2020. But they need 2021 to get away and happen. And so this does really challenge the government and our industry. Okay, what's next? We've now seen our biggest destination being hit by this quarantine decision. What's next? Now is the time the government have to recognise that our industry is different to the UK economy normally. We have a massive impact on the economy of people's jobs and livelihoods that are connected to outbound travel. And they have to consider the impact upon us now that we were the first into this crisis, and we will be the last out of this crisis. And we need to be able to be recognised as a different industry that needs different support.
So Gary, what do you mean by that? Because obviously they can't, if they've got to put quarantine in, they've got to put quarantine in. I guess that's a health decision, albeit they could do it better, which we just discussed. But are you saying we need the furlough scheme extended? Are we needing more grants, more loans? Is that what you're saying?
Well, absolutely. So yes, make the health decisions and make those decisions. If you've got the data that you believe that that's keeping the citizens, country, our people safe. We haven't seen the data. We would, if we were in, and we may very well make the same decision. But for goodness sake, recognise the difference in the impact upon our industry. Recognise that we are the only industry not to just go through the crisis and see our revenue stop, but also the fact we have to give all our profits back over that has been set up over the last 12 months to be able to refund consumers. And that's the difference. It isn't just our economy is just ground to a stop. All the profits we've made over the last 12 months have had to go back to customers. So for goodness sake, please recognise that we are different and treat us differently and give us that support. So that should be more grants. That should be access to cash that supports us to get us to 2021. And then whatever we do in 2020 to get control of this disease, then at least buys us time to be around for 2021. Because be under no illusions, as impactful as quarantine is today, if 2021 happens, the whole of the UK outbound industry disappears.
Well, they're already saying, there's reports again this morning saying that they're predicting now just this one decision, even though we've been through loads already, but this one decision could, be the end for some businesses. It could really well put them under. I mean, Paul, you're nodding. Do you think it's that serious? And do you think that government will listen to what Gary's saying and take the travel industry as a very separate industry to the rest of the economy and do something for us?
Well, never mind an air bridge. It's an economic bridge that companies need right now in this sector. I think the government feels that the whole economy is one, that it needs to be treating everybody the same. And Gary's right, that CBELs and furlough schemes have been extremely successful and helpful. We need that innovation to carry on in Treasury for the travel sector. And that's because the sector is not one you can simply switch on and switch off overnight, as you can with some parts of hospitality, beauty salons, hairdressers, etc., where there is an immediate demand to go. Travel, as we've heard from both Richard and Gary, is something which takes a long time to get going again. So therefore, the government will have to step in and somehow help this sector. I think Rishi Sunak's aware of that. Alok Sharma certainly is. And I think there's an awareness within many MPs, don't forget, behind the scenes, Conservative MPs, who are hearing this directly from their constituents, that times are really tough in travel. And so I think there will be some support for this sector. The problem is it's going to take some time. And there's a gap between the fear that consumers have now of government quarantine measures affecting the rest of the summer and the time when the government can issue the next autumn statement or do something overtly to help the sector, when, of course, it would then face the risk of other sectors shouting, we need help too. Our hands are up, we need support. That's what the government's worried about. They can't help everybody.
I understand that, but you know, like with the Quash Quarantine campaign, which was very successful in the end, and lots of people got behind it. Do we need another campaign to get this extra support, or are we just confident it's going to come? Or I mean, what do we need to do to ensure it's going to come?
Well, I think we may need some further campaigning around quarantine if it starts expanding again, because we need to keep the pressure on the government that it's not an acceptable solution. Other alternatives are available. Better testing at airports, the whole notion of track and trace, test and trace used so effectively in other countries around the world. And I don't know why the government isn't putting more money into these things. They are available. There are companies doing them and trialing them. There are countries such as Iceland, Austria, Vietnam, there are others who are using their airports very effectively to test and trial people coming into their countries. And they're keeping their case numbers down. So I don't understand. Well, actually, I do understand. I think quarantine is a smokescreen for a not very effective test and trace system in this country at the moment. The government knows it's building that system, and it's not mission ready yet, and it needs to be, so that we don't have to put quarantine in place.
Yeah. Well, look, we've lost Richard. I guess his internet connection has dropped out, and I was going to ask him about 2021, but I'll ask you instead, Gary, because you mentioned how important it is that, you know, if we accept that 2020 is obviously going to be very bad, but we need 2021 to be better. How is demand for 2021? And do you think this decision will derail it at all? Or actually will people go, right, I'm definitely not going this year because it's a nightmare, but I will book now for 2021?
Well, I mean, that is the hope, isn't it? That we've got time between now and the 1st of January for the government to get it right, to get the track and trace right, to get the confidence around consumers going overseas. And just going back to Paul's point is, if the government haven't got it ready, just be honest. Be honest with us about where you are on the track and trace, but say we're going to get there. You know, let us bring pressure to bear on the airlines and the airports and everybody to invest in that, because it doesn't matter what the government do ultimately, it's how much confidence the consumer has to travel, and they need to see that they are confident to travel in those areas. And I agree with Paul, the quarantine is a blanket policy. Clearly they must be doing that because they haven't got the better solutions ready. Other countries have. That is disappointing. They will take criticism for that, but just be honest, because that's what we need in a crisis, is honesty. But in terms of 2021, Lucy, it's not just about new bookings, it's about the bookings that have moved. Yeah. It is essential it goes through, because the bookings that have moved, you know, our members were moving up to 65, 70% of bookings from cancellation this year to next year. So they've moved that and protected that profit, but we can't realise it until 2021. Yeah. So even the bookings that are just there, forget new bookings, we'll keep a lot of them alive next year. And that's why it's essential. But the bookings for next year were sat before Saturday's news, creeping up to 30% of normal revenues for 2021. If you load that on top of, that's new bookings, if you load that on top of the existing bookings, then you've got strong performance for next year on cash that the members are going to bring into their businesses. So it is essential. The impact on new bookings will still not stop the requirement for 2021 to happen. And that's why we should all be honest with ourselves. We need to get control of this virus no matter what. We give the government full support to do that, but just be honest with us so we can help explain why they've made those decisions, give confidence to consumers. And as Paul says, there are better alternatives to quarantine. That's what we need to get to. And Spain's foreign minister is saying it is safe to come to parts of Spain. Yeah. We are in control of the risk infection rates in the areas where it's spiked. Well, if he's saying that, yes, he's got a reason to say that.
Well, of course, they want tourists as well. I mean, it's bad for us, obviously, this announcement, but I mean, it's terrible for the destinations which were just getting back on their feet and getting tourists back there that, as you say, don't have really high rates. And so they're kind of penalised by this blanket ban as well, aren't they?
They are, but the government are worried, because if Germany and France are starting to give advice to consumers about being careful to go to Spain, if they come in with a blanket quarantine rule or a rule around Spain, and we don't. I think they're in fear now because of the criticism that they've received from not locking down earlier than other countries at the beginning of this pandemic. And this is why there has to be honesty, both from everybody. And when people get it wrong, they're allowed to get it wrong, be honest about it, and then do what should be right. and what's being driven, as Paul said, by an immature government and immature ministers. They're so worried about what it looks like, they're not being honest of the decision making, and that causes even more fear and even more worry. And that is not what anybody needs in a crisis.
Okay. Well, look, given Richard's made the effort to come back, will we be boring you, Richard?
No, I thought I'd said enough, so I thought it was time for me to get off and get on with some other work. So, no, I might
went off for a coffee.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
I'm glad you came. I'm glad you came back, because I was just really going to. I mean, because obviously we were just talking there about 2021, and I know you see, you've got a really good handle on booking patterns and demand, and what the sort of trends are, and Gary's saying how important it's going to be. I just wondered what you were seeing in your data in terms of, obviously this year's tricky, but is there hope for 2021?
Yeah, well, I think obviously a lot of customers felt 2020 wasn't going to happen, so a lot of customers were rebooking into 2021, and right at the last few months, you could really see that 2021 was the key period. But in the last 4 weeks, you've seen it was previously July and August, now it's August and September 2020 that have really gone really up high and far exceeding 2021 at this particular moment. But the interesting thing was people were only looking for sort of 7 days. So I think you can see the sentiment is that, I just want to get away, even if it's for a short break. If you had a quarantine onto the end of that, 1 week becomes, 3 weeks of no activity, which makes it difficult. But certainly demand's there. We did, a big survey a few weeks ago, and, over 60% would want to travel this year. 90% of the people would wish to travel within the next 12 months. So I think, customers will always want to get away. It's still the great British tourist, pretty resilient. But, clearly, I think we're just having to deal with these obstacles that are put in our way, and also consumers' decision-making to make the right one. But I think, unfortunately, that's probably going to be the nature of it for probably the next few months, as there'll be good periods and then there'll be very challenging periods. And I think, unfortunately, the decision on Saturday is going to mean another challenging period. So it's tough. It's going to be another tricky week to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So I think the overriding message then is we just need forewarning, and as Gary says, honesty, just so that we can help, obviously, do our jobs better. But also we now need to also call for some extra help, because we are obviously in a very difficult situation as an industry.
I think we just need, you may have mentioned it when I was off the line there, but it's just more sophistication from the government, in terms of how we deal with these things. I think there's, we speak about, lightning lockdowns, across this country to ensure our economy continue to go through. Yet when it comes to travel, it seems to be this kind of blanket quarantine to make the government look really quite, assertive, good at decision making. I spoke to a friend the other day, went to Dubai recently for his daughter's wedding, and temperature checks, nasal swabs on arrival. He's free to travel, and we don't have that. It's crazy. A country that depends on outbound tourism to drive inbound tourism, we have policies and decisions like this. It beggars belief, to be honest. Most people won't care. But, there's many millions of people, whether it's hospitality or whether it's travel and tourism, depend on the right decisions and the right treatments being put in place. And, unfortunately, we're suffering again because of the lack of sophistication as to how we deal with these things.
Okay, well, I think you've wrapped it up pretty well there, Richard. Thank you very much for that. And thank you to all of you for your comments this morning. And, let's just hope they listen, and they give us a little bit more warning next time if they're making these decisions. But for now, thank you to Paul Charles from the PC Agency, to Gary Lewis from the Travel Network Group, and to Richard Singer from icelolly.com. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thanks, guys.